Max Sterling, welcome to LarpMix. Today I wanted to show you a pretty interesting technique that you can use to create some pretty cool things for LARP. So depending on the genre you play, you can use this in different ways, but I think you could use this in pretty much most games. You could definitely use it in medieval fantasy. You can certainly use it in a cyberpunk or a post-apocalyptic style setting. I think you may find it pretty interesting. If you've never done a solvent transfer before, then you're going to learn how to do one today. It's very simple, but you are working with chemicals, so you need to make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, and wear the proper personal protective equipment when you're doing this. So definitely gloves. Do it outside. If you want to wear a respirator or a mask, you can do that. But pretty much, as long as you're careful, you just wipe it off and just make sure whatever surface you're working on is covered with something, because if you're using things like we're going to use today, it'll eat through paint and all kinds of stuff. So just keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and see what we need to get started. So to get started, we need something to work with. Of course, I have my gloves on. We have some mineral spirits, some acetone, and some goof off or goo gone. And we're going to need some images. I printed these out on my toner printer, and I grabbed some newspaper as well. Now you can also use things like nail polish remover or wintergreen oil, or really most solvents to do this, but I find acetone works best. So what I'm doing is taking and cutting out this picture. If you notice, there's a lot of black around the outside from where I scanned it in before I printed it, and I don't want all that to transfer over. But if you do, then you can leave it on there. So I'm just cutting the image out, cleaning it up a little bit here before we attempt the transfer. And once you have it cut out, it's really a pretty straightforward process. You're going to flip it over, and you're going to just get the surface of the fabric damp or whatever you're working with. But before you do that, you really need to make sure you cover your surface, because since we're working with solvents, it'll eat right through the clear coat or the paint of what you're working on. So if you're doing this on like a table or something, it'll eat through the varnish. So just be mindful of that. Be sure you have an impermeable layer underneath before you do this. And then you just drop the image on, rub it with a spoon. Now, a metal spoon would be much better, but I didn't have one, so I'm using this. But basically, you're just applying pressure all over the image and waiting until it transfers. Now, if you use a heavier paper to do this, it'll hold up better. If you use a real cheap paper, it may rip. I used regular copier paper, and it seems to be okay, but keep that in mind. Now, that mineral spirits didn't transfer terribly well, more or less just left a shadow. So I decided to try the newspaper with the mineral spirits instead, and this seemed to work a bit better. So I'm going ahead and I'm using this as sort of a background for the image, just so it looks like there's some mysterious ghostly writing behind the image whenever I reapply it here in a moment. So like I said, you can experiment and see what works best for you. In my experience, as I said though, the acetone is your best bet if you just want to dive right in. If you're trying to use the lesser of the toxic options, then you can go ahead and attempt whatever you care to, but I would go ahead and just start straight with the acetone or like a nail polish remover if you're gonna try to get into it. So with the newspaper, you usually get one good run with it, and then you've got to cut out another section. So if you want to cover a large surface, be sure you have an entire newspaper that you're able to cut out. And images will transfer as well. I was just using the text though, because I wanted to avoid any sort of copyright issues. Now I'm pouring a little bit of acetone onto that image I printed out and applying it with the acetone instead of the mineral spirits. And you'll be able to see here in just a second how much better that worked. Now, I kind of like the fact that the entire thing didn't come out. Now, if you rub this real well, you can get the entire image to transfer, but I wanted it to look ghostly, and I think I end up being happy with that right there. And of course, if it doesn't work the first time, if you're doing a simple image like this, you can always print out a couple of them and just make sure you line them up real well and just go over it again if too much of the toner or ink is worn off.
Now on the back side, I'm going to use this old picture of myself, and we're going to put it on the back, and we're just going to go straight to the acetone because I know that it'll work properly. And you can measure it a little bit better than I did here. I kind of just spilled it everywhere, but that's why we wear the personal protective equipment, or PPE. Gloves minimum, but you may want to have something to breathe through, and wear glasses or goggles, because if you ever gotten nail polish remover or something in your eye, that's no picnic. And you can see here how well that worked.
Now after everything was set, I put this in front of a dehumidifier overnight so it would dry out real well. But you can also just leave it sit somewhere and it will dry, over time. But as far as the finished product, here's what we have. So on this side, you can see there's some of the writing from the newspaper. It's very light, and then you have sort of that Grim Reaper guy that I had drawn on there, and it's very sort of ghostly and faint, and that's what I like to use solvent transfers for. Now if you wanted to make it darker, you can certainly try that. You can experiment with this. If you used acetone right off the bat, it would be darker if you rubbed it with a spoon, and the more that you actually rub the image to transfer it over, the better it comes out. So that's what that side ended up looking like. And then here's the part where I transferred the photo of myself. So it's kind of, sort of ghostly and creepy, and I like it a lot. And this is something, like I said, you could add this. I added to this bag just for simplicity's sake, but you can add this onto shirts if you're playing a sort of like cyberpunk game or something. You can take old comic books and you can press them onto like a white shirt or a light colored shirt, and you can have them all over the place, or maybe just in one place if you're doing something for fashion. The same way as far as post-apocalyptic, you can do this. You could lay down a bunch of newspapers or something, lay your shirt down, cover it, roll over it, and then it would look like stuff was imprinted on it from time. Maybe the clothes you picked up were laying on a pile of newspapers or something. Use your imagination, but you can use it for a lot of stuff. You can also use this to make like purity seals for Warhammer or something. If you print everything out and then you transfer the image, you could then go back and you could color over it with marker, or you could just leave it real faded and sort of ghostly like this, depending on what sort of effect you're going for. Then you can transfer to things other than fabric. So I suggest to go out there and just experiment with it and see what you can do. Whenever you're doing a solvent transfer, the important things to remember is that you really need to use a printer that uses toner. If you have like waterproof inks and stuff in your printer, it's not going to work. It has to be like an old school like toner style printer. If not, newspaper, comic books, stuff like that definitely work. Anything that is along those lines will transfer no problem. But if you're going to print something yourself, toner, it's the only way to do it. You can also use markers, and you could draw something and transfer it that way. And really, like I said, just pretty much experiment with it. Just keep in mind, if you're doing letters, and if you want it to come through a lot better than what we did here with the newspaper, stick with the acetone. If you're printing something out and you want to be able to read it, then you need to be sure to mirror that image before you print it. So in most cases, that's flip horizontally and then print it, because when you do the transfer, you're going to get a mirror image. So you want it to be backwards before you transfer it, so that way whenever you pull the transfer off, it's the correct way so you can read it. Now for me, I was just sort of going for like a background sort of pattern on this with the newspaper. I wasn't really trying to be able to read it, and that worked on this. But if you want to be able to read it, then be sure whatever you're doing, you print it out backwards, or else it's going to be backwards when you transfer it. In the same way with images or anything. So if you don't want it to look weird, you need to take that into account before you do it. So hope you learned something new. If you didn't, I hope you have tried this, and you will try it in the future. I think it's very interesting, and whether you're using it for LARP or fashion or some sort of design, or if you're using it to defraud people of money by doing spirit precipitation drawings, whatever the case is, go ahead and give this solvent transfer a try. I think you'll enjoy it, and it's going to give you that little bit of extra that other people may not have with their costumes and props. If you do one, be sure to let me know how it worked out. Be sure to comment below. If you have your own techniques or pro tips, be sure to comment them below. I'd love to know what's going on. Be sure to tag me in any images you post if you do create one of yourself, so I can check it out and like it. And of course, please like my channel, subscribe to it if you haven't already. Please just let everyone know about my channel and that I'm here making all this awesome content. My channel grows because of you, and I really appreciate you watching and enjoying my videos. And please just let everyone else know that they're there so that they can enjoy them as well. And of course, as always, adventure on.